Hello everyone, welcome to the Laravel Meetup. This is our February edition. We've done one in December and we're looking to do one in March, right Max? So for the people that don't know me, I'm Tom. That's Max, wearing Laracon t-shirts just so you can identify the organizers. Just real quickly, if you want to get on the Wi-Fi, that's the password, which is kind of big. I realize that, so take a photo maybe now if you want it. First off, I want to thank our sponsors, which is Formation this instance. They have sponsored our beers and pizzas, so thank you very much. Can we just get a round of applause for that? Thank you. I just want to raise this real quick. For anyone that didn't know, Australia, or PHP Australia, has a Slack channel in which there's a Laravel channel as well. So if you want to chat to some people, or if you have questions or anything, you can always use that. So just go to that URL and you can join the team.
There's a Laravel channel, right?
Yeah, that's what I said. Thanks, Max. So is anyone here looking for a job? So we got, just raise your hands because there will be people looking for developers. So just keep a lookout. So who's looking for developers? There you go. So anyone that's looking for developers, do you just want to come up real quick and just have a little spiel about what it is you do? Reagan will start. So Reagan works for Formation, which is a good start.
So yeah, as Tom said, I work here for Formation. I'm the head of marketing here, so we're basically a development agency. We have about 80 people here working across small to medium and mostly medium to enterprise clients. So some of the likes like the ABC, the Athlete's Foot, kind of self-storage. We build a lot of custom-built applications, so a lot of back-end systems and a lot of interesting and cool stuff. So we're looking for a heap of positions. So even if you aren't personally looking for these, but you know somebody who is, we're always on the lookout. But mainly we're looking for a really strong dev lead, some mid-level PHP developers, some junior PHP developers, some mid-level .NET developers, actually really any kind of strength in .NET. I know this is a PHP meetup. A front-end dev, a QA engineer, and a WordPress dev. So we're looking for multiple positions in some of those. So if anybody is looking to get into one of those roles or know somebody who is, come and see me, or there's business cards lying around, and they'll have our email address on it. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Reagan. Max, did you want to do
Hi guys. So presently I'm working at Cover Genius, which is an insurance tech startup. We're an insurance company, but more we're a technology company, to the extent that in our main office I think it's pretty much just engineers, and we've relegated everyone else to a different co-working office. So if you are interested in working in Laravel, and if you're interested in working in microservices, APIs, and pretty much all new greenfield projects, come talk to me. We're looking for a whole bunch of mid-level developers at the moment, and then soon we'll be looking for juniors, but just at the moment we're looking to hire maybe like 3-4 mid-level PHP developers. If you know any Vue or React, that would be a bonus, but not really necessary. So yeah, just come talk to me.
Cool, thanks, Max. Were you looking for something?
I'm always looking for different contracts.
Okay. Oh, good. All right, thanks for that, guys. So yeah, talk to Max or Reagan behind that computer if you're looking for a job. So I just put this up there because we're always looking for speakers. So if you're interested in speaking, or if you have a topic that you want to talk about but you're not really confident, just contact us. We can help you out with that, and we can either get you speaking or get someone speaking on your behalf. And also, just if you have topics that you want to know anything about, just contact us, and we'll via Meetup or that Slack group that I posted on. Yeah, cool. So speakers tonight, we'll have Harlan Wilton, who's sitting at the front. He'll start talking about Laradoc. Then we'll have Dave Clark sitting on this side, who's going to do a lightning talk on Bref.sh. And then we have Max Snow talking about Laravel 5.8. Unfortunately, we had a cancellation. The Tim McDonald was going to talk about Eloquent and collections and everything around that. He's had a family emergency, so he's had to back out, unfortunately. So this is what we're going to talk about today. And if there's any discussion topics or anything you want to talk about, we can do that at the end. And we'll probably bring some other things up that we'd like to discuss with you guys. So yeah, hands together for Harlan.
Seems to be working. Okay. Hi guys. Yep, I'm Harlan, and yeah, today I'm going to be talking about Laradoc, just kind of in a general sense, in kind of what the purpose of it is, why you would use it, kind of the problems it's solving, some of the caveats, and even hosting your applications using the Laradoc configuration. So yep, get into it, and of course my switcher isn't going to work. Here we go. That is super laggy. Hold on, bear with me for 1 second. Okay, so no nice animations, but yep, about me, mainly working with Vue.js and Vue.js and Laravel at the moment. I came across Laradoc maybe 2 years ago while I was banging my head against the wall trying to figure out Docker and how to write my own images. So I'm kind of thankful for finding it, and yeah, I've just been using it since then. I'm not a DevOps engineer, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. This is from the perspective of someone who just messes with Laravel, and then when I need some Docker, then I just chuck it in. So, yep. What is Laradoc? So yeah, it's just a community collection of Docker files for pretty much every imaginable service that you could integrate with Laravel in terms of DevOps. So it aims to kind of simplify and get them best practices within your Docker setup. So yeah, we have some good stuff. We have bunch of different containers, very active community with lots of guides for fixing common problems. Mac users, notoriously annoying for Docker. There you go. They have good documentation there for them. And all the images extend official Docker images, and by that I mean PHP releasing a Docker image, they're built off of that. So yeah, that's good. Actually, before I go ahead, is anyone using Docker in their Laravel applications at the moment? Yeah, got a few people. Is anyone using Laradoc? Yep, so that's good. A few of you can learn a few things. And is anyone using it to actually host their application in AWS or Kubernetes or anything like that? All right, 3 people.
Not
okay.
Laradoc,
Not Laradoc? No, specifically Laradoc. Yeah. So then we come to the here we go. So these are all the containers. There's a lot of stuff there. A few of them you might recognize. So I mean, we got Apache, AWS CLI, Elasticsearch, your Nginx. These are all services you can kind of attach to your Docker Compose, and you can just spin up any of these fairly easily. But this brings a problem because it's really bloated by default. If you've ever looked at the GitHub of Laradoc or you've pulled in the code, there's heaps of stuff in there that 90% of the projects or even more won't need. You have heaps of environment variables, and it can just be really overwhelming, especially if you're new to Docker. So hopefully it can dispel a few of these issues with you. Yes, so why Docker Laradoc exists as opposed to just using Docker itself. If anyone's here has tried to actually build their own Docker images, it's not fun. You'll quickly realize that you're running into a lot of problems. The first one people usually come across is these file permission issues, where when you go inside your Docker container and execute commands on your files, they basically set the ownership to a different user. So Laradoc kind of takes care of that for us. The reading and writing speeds. So again, Mac users have Docker Sync, which is its own kind of library which aims to kind of get around the limitations of Mac and how its file changes actually affect your containers. And yeah, these new optimizations that Laravel has, Docker has for volume mounting. Networking, so yep, Laradoc comes with 2 networks out of the box, a front end and a back end. So this is to give you some sort of inherent security in that your back end services talk to each other. For example, your Apache will talk to your PHP FBM, and then you'll have your Apache also talking to the world out there. So yeah, it's kind of security out of the box for you. Yep, you have an M file or just configuration on your environment variables where you can change things like your PHP version, any sort of software version, any sort of PHP dependency you have. Just kind of speed that up and just experiment a bit easier. Yes, faster, more secure build. So talking again about that, using official vendor images. So these are images that people are currently using in production hosting. So they've been built by official people like the PHP community or PHP maintainers. And they're building them low-level libraries. So if anyone's played around with Docker and tried to build PHP in it, you're probably waiting around for 10 minutes or so for that to happen. So this kind of abstracts that for us. It lets you really easily experiment with versions. So within Laradoc, you'll have one environment variable for your PHP version, say 7.1. Maybe you want to experiment with 7.2. So you'll just go in and change that value. So yes, something that might be new to some people who have played a little bit with Docker is having a container called Workspace. Workspace kind of exists as the be-end and end-all of using your application in terms of the development experience. So say if you were to run Git, any Yarn stuff, any Node stuff, it's locking them versions in that container so that whenever you have any developer jumping in, everyone's using the same version of Node, everyone has the same version of PHP, same version of AWS tools, and that's just a little command that you would use typically to get into it. And yeah, you can mount your configuration files to the Workspace container. So the goal is to have this Docker container which you can jump into, and you'll pretty much have the same experience that you would otherwise, but all the versions are locked to what you need for that specific project. So here's some tips I have. Make sure you're building your images from your config. So if you have a docker-compose YAML file, typically it won't have the image tag on it. If you add that, you can then upload your images and you make them accessible to other parts of your workflow. So if you're using pipelines like Jenkins or Bitbucket pipelines, you can use your Workspace container, and you already know for a fact that it's going to do everything you need. because you've been using it locally. And if you have developers coming on board that don't need any extra configuration, they don't need to rebuild your containers, so they're just super snappy. Just download them and they're ready to go. The PHP worker, so I think typically the majority of local Laravel projects will use sync as the queue worker, so things kind of as they're queued, they're kind of executed. So if you're using Laradoc, you can set up this PHP worker container, which all it's going to do is use this supervisor D to basically ping that queue and run anything that needs to run. So the advantage of that is when you're pushing to production or different environments, you already know for a fact that your queue worker is going to behave, basically. Yeah, so this goes along that bloat problem. There's a lot of stuff that's installed on your images that you do not need. So my advice is just to cut it all out, especially image optimizers. This takes several minutes to build, and it's on the workspace container and on the PHP container and the PHP FPM container. If you don't need image optimizations, just get rid of them. Make workspace your baby. So really put the effort in and add everything you could possibly need to workspace, because it's going to save you time in the long run. And it just makes developing a lot nicer. So like I'll mount my ZSHRC, so I get all my standard aliases and my git config, so everything is behaving as it would if I was just interacting with my application outside of that workspace. Use it on any project. So how I actually got started with Laradoc, I was maintaining WordPress projects actually. So it's not limited to Laravel, and I would actually encourage any PHP project and even any project at all where you need Docker, consult Laradoc first, because they probably have the containers already there for you. And there's no point redoing it if it's already been done, I guess. Along the lines of a million environment variables, you can just convert some of them to static values to kind of clean up your .m file if that's where you're sticking things. I would encourage that. There's a lot of things like just PHP libraries, like are you using the zip tool in PHP, or the zip module, whatever you call it. So them standard things that aren't really going to change for each developer. So Laradoc does have another problem in that each container is writing things to your root folder, potentially. Just make a runtime folder and chuck everything in there. I don't like having a project root with a million folders in it, so save some time. So this is to do with actually hosting your Laradoc on AWS or Kubernetes, whatever you want. So there's this package which will take your configuration file, which is what I have here. And as you can see, these are all the environment variables, and it just goes on and on and on. These are all the little packages that you might have in your workspace. Just a lot of things in here. This library is just a command line tool. You'll run it on this file, and you'll end up with something like this. So this is for specifically Elastic Beanstalk on AWS. It's basically taking it, pointing your image to the image you've already built. So we don't want to rebuild images in the pipeline if they're not going to change. So it's just going to pull it in, and I mean that just kind of works. There's some small configuration changes you may need to do, but for the most part that's good. And then you'd have your application. This is an example pipeline script within Bitbucket. So this is also using the Elastic Beanstalk CLI, and this is all the code I need to have Laradoc working in a production environment. This EB deploy is going to trigger that file to be read, and the actual technical side of it within AWS is going to spin up the ECS, Elastic Container Service or something, and then it's going to spin up the Elastic Beanstalk instance as well. So that's mainly it. I'll show just quickly through the code for those people who aren't as familiar with Docker. I think we can all kind of see that. But yeah, you just have this Docker compose file. This is kind of your source of truth for everything that's going to happen Docker-wise. And then we just have our Docker files. So we have Apache in here, MySQL, all the other ones, and just a big old end file with a million things in it. So this is an example where I haven't really cleaned up any of the environment variables just from Laradoc, but that's always something you can come in and do afterwards on the project.
Do you normally do that?
I usually don't have the patience to do it just because there's so many. If you do have the patience, I would recommend it, because there's definitely things in here you'll never use. Like, for example, the Drupal console. Like, it's not going to be applicable for everyone. So I would actually recommend you go into the workspace and just get rid of it. I do like to modify my workspace container to actually have ZSH instead of bash, just so the user experience is a bit nicer. But yeah, that's pretty much it. What else was I going to say? Yeah, so when you pull in Laradoc, you're going to have 1 million of these containers. Just delete them. Delete is the best process with Laradoc. Yeah. And just an example of kind of what it would actually look like. I'm going to SSH into a staging server where I've actually set this up. This is in AWS. So this is just an EC2 instance running Docker. I have to sudo su to use Docker, but I can run it. And I can see I have all my images here. And these are just Laradoc images that I've built and put in that configuration file I showed you. So the only one that wasn't from Laradoc is this Amazon ECS agent, which basically just monitors these other containers and makes sure they're doing what they're meant to be doing. So I can then I can go into my workspace container. Imagine I'm trying to debug something on staging, and I just want to get dirty and get in the code. So I'm now root in the workspace container. I want to be Laradoc, because whenever we're interacting with any files or any applications, we should be Laradoc. I have the ZSH here, so I have all my nice aliases. I have Git, I have yarn, so everything you could need to manage this application. This does leave a small footprint on your actual server to kind of keep this workspace container running, but within the configuration you can restrict how much CPU and RAM it's using. So in this instance it's using, I think, 128 megabytes of RAM, which I can afford for this server. So yep, that's pretty much it. Yeah, and we also have like all the, so if I was to run migrations, I'd do it through here. And in fact, my current migration process is to basically, it's pretty dodgy, but to SSH into this instance and run that command, just because Elastic Beanstalk is pretty annoying. Yep, so that's that. And then if I wanted to say, if I want to check the logs, so I have my Apache instance here. Docker, what is it? Attach, I want to do. So this is going to give me anything that's happening on my API. So I actually just got hit with the Elastic Beanstalk health checker. If I was to run this, I got some Stack Overflow. This is just an API built with Max's lovely API boilerplate. But if I come back over here, I can see that request coming in. So I can kind of debug it in real time. And then because Docker's a bit annoying, say if I want to quit out of this and it doesn't actually work how it should, I can just literally kill that container. I can kill Docker. I just killed all my containers on staging. Wouldn't recommend for production, but if we wait like a minute or two, this ECS agent is going to bring them all back. So we kind of have that flexibility, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. Yeah. Well, fingers crossed they'll come back. But yeah, that's my talk. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, actually, let me see if it comes back. There we go. Yes.
I'm not a Docker or Laravel specialist, but rather than deleting all these modules you've mentioned here, wouldn't it be easier to just sort of download, say, an Ubuntu Docker image and then install Ubuntu packages?
Yeah, so you run into the same kind of issue I was describing where these caveats with Docker, if you're not aware of them, you're going to run into them problems. So for example, the file permission issues. At that point as well, you're not working on official packages. So if you're using the official PHP 7.1 Docker image, that's going to be already considering security issues. It's already going to be considering performance issues. It's built, I think, off Alpine Linux or something as well, just to be really performant. So I wouldn't recommend ever building off an Ubuntu image unless it's very kind of custom and you don't plan on hosting it, which is most Docker use, but yeah, something to keep in mind.
Yeah, where I work, we use Laradoc, and I notice like all our projects just use like I think it's the same container. It's just can you use Laradoc on like a per project basis as well, or?
Yep. Yeah. So that is what I would typically do. You need a package for that because you run into issues where whenever you want to start a new project, you'll have to stop the previous ones. So there's a couple of packages for that where you have, I think there's one called Docker Proxy, which is pretty good. But I was looking at the Laradoc recently, and it gets updated like every couple of weeks, so I kind of lose track of all the packages they have in it. But they have one now called Trafic, which is, it's a bit annoying to set up, but it pretty much does exactly what you want. You can run like 50 Laradoc containers and have them all route through this Trafic package. And it's basically an engine server that kind of watches any containers that come up and come down and kind of changes the, I don't know the Nginx equivalent, but like the vhost file. So it's just some kind of tricky routing that happens.
Yeah, it's a reverse proxy.
Yeah, reverse proxy.
Everything routes through that.
Anyone
Yeah.
know the pros and cons of that versus proxy?
So I can tell you Docker Proxy is a pain in the ass for HTTPS. And the only real solution I found was to just be running certbot, so you can just generate real SSL certificates whenever you need to for your local URLs. but it's just it's a bit annoying. Maybe it's easier since I used it. Actually, I don't think this is the package. Yeah, so I actually kind of resorted to running everything just on port 80 locally to get around that. Not ideal, but yeah, it's not an easy solution, unfortunately. Maybe Trafic sorted it out. I haven't actually experimented with it too much.
So we just got 2 more questions, one here and
Just wondering how that's scaling. So if it's getting lots of traffic hitting your Laravel doc image, is AWS watching that little AWS watcher thing, watching that go, oh flip, we're running out of space? And
So it's standard.
Scale up nothing.
It's standard Elastic Beanstalk configuration on top of a well-configured kind of that file I showed you before. I don't think it's here. So in here, I don't think I've done it, but you can basically tell Elastic Beanstalk what's the maximum amount of memory and what's the maximum amount of CPU that this container can use. So I haven't done the CPU one, but you can also say if it's essential. So if this container reaches that limit, it will basically ping something off to Elastic Beanstalk saying this instance is at its maximum, and Elastic Beanstalk will boot up another instance. So if you're in a production sense, you may be running 10 EC2 instances, all with Docker, all running this Laradoc configuration for you. But yeah, I haven't really got into the nitty-gritty of super optimizations. Not yet anyway.
Have you been using it to deploy onto the production environment?
Yeah.
And how is the stability? Because even Docker itself has a lot of stability issues, and it's not really recommended by many to deploy in production.
Yep, that was definitely the case when I started with Docker. Like the golden rule was never use it in production. So I did always have that in my mind, but I looked into it maybe 6 months ago, and the scene has changed quite a lot, especially with like Kubernetes. A lot of big players are coming into the space, hosting very large kind of user-based applications through Docker. So I think it can be done correctly. So I wouldn't be scared of putting Docker in production if you're confident in what you're doing. Otherwise, yeah, you gotta be careful because like even this may fall over. For me, when I hit 10,000 people hitting the site, I'm not really sure. But yeah, to answer your question, the actual deployment is again through this Elastic Beanstalk, and it just runs the CLI, uploads this configuration file, and yeah, it spins up everything for me. So it's all done through these 2 files. There's no other kind of configuration behind the scenes. Cool.
Hi there folks, how are you? Can you all hear me? Yep, good, alrighty. So you can probably see lots of things on the screen there. So just to kick off, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Dave Clark. I'm one of the organisers of the Sydney PHP group, also an organiser of the Sydney TypeScript group. I'm definitely doing a lot more JavaScript these days than I am PHP. But what I'm keen to do tonight, I was asked if I could give a quick lightning talk on something. Something that some of you may already be aware of is a framework called Bref.sh. And now the whole point of that framework is to try and make it easy to deploy PHP functions and applications onto AWS, so you can leverage serverless architecture with your PHP applications. Now, how many people are going to end up doing that? Probably not that many right away, but if you're really interested in getting a bit more information about it, then what I'd recommend we do is we do a very quick overview here, and then I'll make sure there's a link available to the videos from the January PHP meetup where Matthew Napoli, the guy behind the framework, along with a whole stack of other contributors, of course, you're making it happen, but he gave a talk about the origins of Bref and gave an overview of the sorts of reasons why he actually wanted to go down the road of developing that framework. Now, before we go into this, it makes sense just to talk a little bit about serverless architecture and just make sure we're all on the same page. First of all, hands up if you're aware of what I'm saying when I say Lambda, right? AWS Lambda, an API gateway. Yep. Okay, keep your hands up for Google Functions and Azure Functions. Yep. Maybe not so much. Okay, cool. So the thing about serverless architecture, as far as it's being promoted to the development community with these different function as a service platforms, right? The whole idea is that you take the smallest unit of functionality and then you just deploy it onto a relevant cloud provider's platform. Well, they'll execute the code for you, right? So you'll find that there's a lot of quick wins for folks if you're already familiar with things like Node.js, being able to take a very small functionality, whatever it is that you want, and deploying it out onto AWS in a moment with various different tools that are available. For Amazon, they've got their own tool called SAM, so you can leverage a particular configuration file format and then deploy your functions out onto their platform. But what I had noticed when Amazon first came out with the whole Lambda thing, people were thinking this is great. Also, when API Gateway came along, the idea of that was that you could go to a URL and then that would delegate across to the relevant function to allow you to execute it nice and easily. The interface for working with it really wasn't easy. So the point was, what can we do as developers to make life easier for ourselves to be able to take advantage of that functionality? There was a guy who came up with this framework called the serverless framework, and the whole idea behind that was, regardless of which provider platform it was that you wanted to deploy your functionality on, the idea was to provide a fairly consistent configuration format in order to make it easy for you to do so. The thing is, that whole space has grown very, very quickly. And what that means is that idea of providing a unified configuration file format is not really that realistic, because what's going to end up happening is that each vendor will have their own very specific implementation where the configuration values are quite different anyway. So, there's always going to be some gaps that you need to work to. So I'm kind of talking a lot here. I hope that it's making a bit of sense so far. What I wanted to do here, just to show you a couple of key things, right? So my screen's being shared here just now. So first and foremost, if you're interested in digging in a little bit and having a bit of an experiment yourself, then you could go over to the docs, Bref.sh. That's French for brief or short. The idea being that in most cases you're going to be like deploying very small things. However, one of the cool things that we've seen, which may be of benefit to companies where they want to leverage Laravel, but they don't necessarily have a lot of additional other resources that they want to use, they could deploy a Laravel application out onto Lambda and have it execute with a custom runtime. The thing is, AWS were providing the opportunity to leverage Node. They were providing the opportunity to leverage Java, Golang, a variety of other things. For those who wanted to use PHP, they couldn't, but now that we can use custom runtimes, that's meant that people could do what Matthew's done, which is to go off and leverage custom PHP runtime. So you can run PHP FPM and have it execute your application. So dig in, have a look. The first steps are all detailed here. And you can pretty much follow along and do all the things as they've stated, So opening up a new project, using Composer to require in the Bref project, and then initializing a new project, and then following the steps to decide what you're going to do. Now, what does that actually look like on the command line? I'll just go over to this tab here. So I've gone ahead and installed the relevant dependencies, right? And I'll just make that even bigger again. So installed the relevant dependencies, and then over here, what you'll see is you're presented in this wizard here with an opportunity to specify what is it you're actually trying to create here. Is it a PHP function? Is it an HTTP application? Is it just a console application that you want to deploy? So you go through the process, you say, okay, well, what is it you want to do? In my case, what I wanted to do was get some URL that I could go to and just see the output of a function. Keeping it really simple for a bit of a hello world example. So that's what I ended up doing. I took option 1, it went ahead, it initialized the project for us, and then it was basically on to next steps. So I'll show you in the editor here. So I've got PHP Storm here. I ended up creating a project called Bref example, and I'll just zoom in here. So obviously, very simple function here, and all it's doing is just outputting a JSON response, right? And when I say that, it's just a string. So you can see it's taking this array and then JSON encoding it, keeping it super simple, giving some information about Bref. So what the idea with that was to get very quickly to a point in time where you could go off and hit an endpoint and then get that response. And that's what I ended up doing. Now, tonight, before coming on up here, I thought I'd give it a go with the latest version of the framework, and I did find that I was running into a few issues, but I think it's worthwhile sharing if you do decide that you want to have a bit of a play with this, just to see what you would do to go on around debugging those sorts of issues. So what I'll show you is that over here in this window, I had gone down the path of, first of all, following the steps. You might be able to see that at the bottom. Again, I'm going to make that a little bit bigger to make life easier. So let's make that bigger. You can see down the bottom here, this part of the command line. It might be a little bit too hard to see for some folks. But what I was doing was creating a new S3 bucket using the AWS CLI. And then what we want to do to be able to leverage this stuff in the cloud, we need to actually package it up. So that means taking the dependencies and essentially making a zip of what it is that we want to be deployed onto the AWS, right? So the idea is that you use the SAM package command, which is, again, AWS specific command line command, in order to package that up. And then we're in a position where we go off and use the command to deploy that. This is stuff that's pretty easy to follow from the docs, right? So if you follow the deployment steps, you'll see it all here. So they give you the information about how does it work and how do you actually deploy it? How do you create the bucket? How do you go ahead and deploy it? If you do run into issues, I'd be more than happy to have a chat and see if we can try and help you get up and running in general, especially if you're not familiar with the AWS CLI or any of this sort of stuff. But in general, there's you know, a bit of a community growing around this, and they'll more than likely be happy to help as well. So if you run into an issue, for example, like if I tried to go ahead and deploy this, I'm going to find that this ends up failing, right? So what I'll do, I'll actually, just to go down the whole pathway, I'm going to create the bucket so you can see what happens, right? So creating a bucket tells me it's made the bucket. And for packaging up the function that's there, I'm going to run the package command. And this time I'm going to specify that new bucket that I want to package it up for deployment to. And then I'm going to go ahead and find the deployment command, and we'll then run that with the bucket as well. And what I'm expecting is that this is going to fail because there's some kind of issue underneath the hood. But if I don't know what it is, how am I going to find out? Well, the CLI should actually do a lot of help for us here by giving us some output to tell us if something's failed, what command we can run to actually dig in and see what has gone on. So in a moment, unless this works, if it works, that's great. But if it doesn't, then I'll show you what you do to get a little bit more information and how to interpret the information that's coming back. So while I'm doing that, any immediate questions that's come to anybody's mind about this sort of stuff? Yeah, Max? You know what? I'm pretty sure that since the latest version, it's come down a fair bit. But there's no doubt about it. There's like overhead for doing the the cold start, like there is for anything, but more so with it being PHP. Exactly. Yeah. So like Node will be much faster, all that sort of thing. You would anticipate it would be, but there's nothing quite like actually testing it yourself to see what the difference is. Just a quick thing about why would you care about this kind of architecture? Probably should have started with that. In terms of the reason why I became quite partial to it. If you can imagine a situation where, let's take an example of a not-for-profit company, right? Let's imagine that they've got largely static content that they serve up to their customers. I say customers, but whatever the situation is, they're serving up static content. And maybe the only little bit of functionality that requires interaction with the server could be something like, hey, we've got a contact form that allows people to volunteer or donate money. Right? Does that make sense to run in some sort of managed environment where they're paying like money for every month, in the maybe tens, hundreds, or even thousands, depending on what kind of package they're on? I don't think so. No. You could end up leveraging, in this case, that static. If you were able to take all their static content, put it into the likes of an S3 bucket, you could then leverage something like AWS CloudFront to sit in front of it like a CDN, right? And then you can map the custom domain name to that and get a free SSL certificate out of it, right? You're in that situation where the static content's going to be served that way. Then you can leverage on the back end for the form just a serverless endpoint, API gateway, right? So API gateway, receive the incoming request, the function runs, parsing out the parameters, does any relevant validation, and then goes ahead and does whatever it needs to do. You can leverage that whole event-based side of things if you want to. Suddenly a company like that, where they've been used to shelling out a whole stack of cash every single month for stuff that they don't even use, are then in a position where their bill could be like less than $1 a month. that's where it starts to become really quite powerful. So this running PHP in serverless, some people might scoff at and go, why the hell would you do that? But if you think about what an enabler it could be for certain groups, that's where it starts to become really powerful. You think about, okay, not everything's a nail and not everything needs a hammer, right? But that kind of scenario, it could be really empowering and allow people to reinvest money back into what they do best or what they should be doing. Anyway, that's a bit of an idea. You can see here, while I was gas bagging on, we've got a message that's come back for us, which is saying, okay, it failed to create or update the stack. Run the following command to fetch the list of events leading up to the failure. So sure, we can just do that right away. And when I do this, I get this big set of information coming back in JSON format, right? So I can go through from the last thing that was done. It's telling me about the fact that it was doing the rollback. I can see here that the delete of the stack was complete. So I'm going backwards through each one of these events to get to the one where it actually was telling us about a problem. So a rollback kicked off here, right? The create failed. Why did it fail? And it's telling me because a particular user wasn't authorized to perform the Lambda get layer version on a particular Lambda resource. Now, because I've been working with this for a little bit longer, I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I know that this is most likely then related back to, you know, that being able to leverage that custom runtime that we were talking about a while ago. So I'll want to dig in and understand why is it failing now? Is it something that's changed in between when I first tried using this framework back in January when Matthew gave his talk, because I thought it would be fun to have a go at it, and I managed to, as you see, get one up and running pretty effortlessly, right? So, but as I say, today it's not working for me, so I'd want to dig in and understand why. But anyway, that's a little bit of an overview of Bref, and I think that what will be most valuable, if you want to understand the origins of it, the video that Matthew has, you know, very kindly let us take of the meetup in January. It's really fantastic. He's got a very engaging style and takes you on the journey from all manner of interesting things that he looked at to where he's actually leveraging it in production for things like CI/CD pipeline tooling, and that's kind of cool as well. All right, nice one, folks. Thanks for that. Cheers.
Any questions? Yep.
Hi, mate.
Hi, mate. That was very interesting. Thank you.
Hey, no worries.
Can you add up components? And if yes, how far can you go through Composer, maybe?
You know, there's one thing you need to be wary of, and this is, as far as I understand it with Lambda in general, there will be a sort of maximum package size. You've got to be careful of exceeding that. And you've also got to be careful as well with, you know, the CloudFormation templates that end up being created, because there will be some limits around, you know, how many resources can be created or maintained within a particular CloudFormation template. So there's a few things to think about, but in general, the idea would be to keep it bref, keep it short, you know, keep it to the point. And, you know, maybe you do want to use something like Laravel or whatever. You know, you could leverage the idea of having that completely separate front end deployed in a similar way to what I was talking about with the static content scenario. You could have your single page application, which is then communicating with a very thin API backend. And, you know, you could have multiple endpoints deployed, or you could do something like something I've enjoyed doing recently for some little quick API and simple single page application front ends has been just to, you know, follow that approach for the front end, and then on the back end I've been using Node more. And when I say been using Node more, the sort of thing I've been enjoying doing is taking the likes of Express, which is an application which most folks who are used to Node development will know of. It has its own routing system, and so what you could do is just use API gateway and have it proxy to the Express routing system, so you can very quickly define all your relevant endpoints in a straightforward manner, and then deploy that application out into the wild and benefit from it right away. So keep it as small as possible, keep the execution time as small as possible. Certainly, like Max pointed out before, the execution time is likely to be that little bit higher with it being PHP. But yeah, hope that helped a little bit. Yeah. Any other questions, folks?
Cool. We'll just have a quick 5-minute break, grab a beer, go to the toilet, and then we'll be back for Max's talk.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks, folks.
Alrighty. Thanks for coming, guys, and sticking around. So I was gonna do like a more interesting talk.
That's not how you open.
I'm sorry. I was gonna do a more interesting talk, but I've been pretty busy with work, so I haven't had time to like properly prepare. But next month, come to the March meetup at the end of March, I guess, last Tuesday of March maybe. I'll definitely do like a really awesome talk there. Not that this talk is not awesome, but like, you know, that one, that'll be just to blow your mind. Guarantee it. All right, so I guess I have two screens. Is it left or right? Hey, there we go. All right, so I'm gonna do a talk on Laravel 5.8. And why is it useful to do a talk on Laravel 5.8? Well, for the last few iterations of Laravel, I've kind of updated it very, very easily. You know, do a bit of a composer update, run the good old unit test, and it just kind of works. It's been, okay, that's pretty cool. But this time around, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. And I'm sure it's going to ignite a little bit of controversy. And for anyone interested, Laravel 5.8 actually comes out tomorrow. Maybe US time, I don't know, but it's tomorrow. It's on Wednesday. So you can theoretically update tomorrow if you're really keen for it. And I'll be talking through some of the more trivial changes, interesting changes, and backwards breaking changes. So let's get started. First of all, something I'm really keen for. Yeah. So if I don't know who here knows about Carbon 2. Yeah. Yeah. Every now and again, I want to do something, and Carbon doesn't support it, but Carbon 2 does, and I'm like, oh, it's fine. I'll just pull it in. Nope. Laravel requires Carbon 1. And it's very, very hard to get Carbon 2 into a Laravel project. There are like this kind of like wrapper projects which put it into a different namespace, but it's not very neat. So for just a little bit of a context, Carbon 2 has a huge amount of new features and functions, and it has microsecond precision, which Carbon 1 doesn't. And yeah, previously it was very hard to use it, but starting from Laravel 5.8, you can actually choose which version of Carbon you want to use, which is pretty cool. Migrating from Carbon 1 to 2 is in itself probably like a whole talk in itself because it's a little bit complicated, but it's really worthwhile. And down here, this is kind of like, you know, Carbon 1, Carbon 2. Makes sense. Yeah. Automatic policy resolution. So this is like a very little but cool thing. So previously, if you have a policy for a model, you have to register it. Well, when I say register, just like add a line like this up the top here. But in the future, so someone did a pull request basically based on the convention of where you would put these files. It'll automatically detect policies for a model, so you don't have to do anything anymore. So this is kind of neat. It's a really small thing, but it's just like an extra thing you don't have to do when you make a new model and policy. And this is like the kind of thing why I really like Laravel, which is if you follow standard conventions, you just don't have to do as much stuff. Blade template file path, so pretty simple. If you compile your Blade templates, they look a little bit obfuscated. Like if you have a look at the file name here, it's not very clear as to where it's coming from. So someone from the PHP Storm team actually did a pull request into Laravel to allow for this. So now it'll put the path of the actual Blade template, which is written up the very top. So you can see on the first line there's like a path to the Blade template, which is used in the compile template. Again, really small thing, but if you use Blade a lot, it's really going to help you debug. .env 3.0. So this is one I'm also looking forward to. I'll explain why. So right now Laravel uses .env 2.0. 3.0, what is it going to have? It's going to have more flexibility around where you want to pull in the environment variables from. First class support for multi-line variables, so you can actually have an end variable which is multi-line. That's really useful if you want to have any kind of like a key, like a private key. No more trimming your values, accepts a list of paths to use for searching, and stronger validation of variable names. And the reason why I'm looking forward to this is that we have this really weird thing in our Laravel Docker setup, which is the port for Redis, the environment variable for the Redis port comes in with the entire like IP address path for the Redis container plus the port. So you have like the hostname colon port number, and obviously it breaks everything. So I had to write this function which extracts just the port from the port environment variable. And I just tried to debug it like a couple of times. I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but it's like the weirdest thing. And I have no idea where this is coming from. Like it's not anywhere in our Docker setup, so I'm thinking it weirdly comes from some Docker container, one of the ones that we're using. And it's super, super weird, and I'm hoping maybe somehow, for some reason, .env 3.0 will fix this problem. Yeah, so those are the major changes, except the really bad ones. And other miscellaneous things. So these are like kind of interesting but less relevant things. So there's support for PHP Unit 8. If you want to use 7 or 8, it's just a switch in your composer file. The old event firing function has been removed because it's been deprecated for some time. The markdown file directory has been changed to default one, which is classified as a high impact change. So I guess if you're using markdown files a lot in your resources, just have a look at that one. Yeah, I think so. There's some additions to irregular plurals. So if you have a plural like fixes? No. That's like additions, i.e. fixes. But yeah, if you have some extremely weird plurals which are not standard, there's more of them added into Laravel. And that has implications for Eloquent, of course. Cache locking safety improvements. So this is something I've never used, but apparently some cache drivers, they had problems with cache key locking, so it's been reworked. I don't know, if you're using that, definitely have a look, because apparently it's also a high impact change. And deferred service providers, the way they work has been changed slightly. So previously you would define this defer property. Now instead of that, you have to implement the deferred service provider interface or something like that. And the next most Slack notification changes are being pushed to a separate package. So if you're using that, you have to pull in that package manually in your composer file. So good so far. Now for the really interesting things. Queuing and deprecation of string array helpers. All right. So you think that a minor package update should have no breaking changes, huh? Not likely. Caching. So the context to this is that fairly recently, I guess, there came PSR 16 from the framework interoperability group, and the PSR relates to caching, so that all frameworks have a very similar caching interface. And so the way that TTL is specified has now been changed as a result. So previously, in all Laravel versions, including up to 5.7, the cache TTL was specified in minutes. From the next version, it's specified in seconds. So if you have code like this, guess what? It's just going to massively change. And I don't know how common this is. Like, who puts their cache TTLs like that? Anyone? Yeah? Yeah. I mean, I usually use a constant at least, but they're kind of mostly integers, right? It's a little bit annoying because now they don't mean minutes, they mean seconds. But there is a pretty good workaround. I just thought I'd mention there is Laravel Shift, which is a service that automatically applies any relevant changes to your Laravel project as you update. It costs I don't know, $10 per project that's converted, per shift. Yeah, thank you. But probably a better thing to do is actually to take this opportunity to rewrite the way that you do your cache. And I think I've used this once in my whole life and I forgot about it, but it's actually really simple. So Carbon has a helper called now, and so I should say the cache functions which use a TTL, they can take in a datetime frame interface. So what does that mean? You can pass it a datetime object or Carbon or anything that implements it. So instead of increasing your cache instead of setting your TTL using an integer representing minutes or seconds or whatever else, you can actually do it explicitly using this kind of notation, so it's super clear what's happening. And if you were to do it this way, which is the really smart way of doing it, then this sort of change wouldn't break your code. It would just work the same, right? So if you're using integers in your cache, I recommend you convert to doing it this way because it's a lot better and it's a lot more clearer, and it's never going to break no matter what crazy changes there will be in the cache interface. Is that fairly obvious to everyone? Everyone knows what's going on? Cool. Yeah, so this kind of caught me by surprise because this is just probably going to, you just know this is going to screw up so many projects. People who never read the changelog, they'll just update and things will just not work and it's going to be hilarious. Other changes, so if you don't specify TTL, it now defaults to null, which means cache forever. And if you use a TTL of 0 or lower, it will cause a cache invalidation on that key.
So what was it before?
So before there was no there was no parameter there at all.
If you didn't specify TTL, what would happen?
It's a good question. Probably an error, maybe, or it would do nothing. I don't know. Does anyone know?
I'm pretty sure it was required with that put method from memory. But then otherwise it was like cache remember or something. I don't know. Something like that.
Yeah, for more details, check out the PSR. It's actually not that big. Like, it's not an RFC or anything, so you can read it in like 5 minutes probably. And string array helpers. Now, this is the thing that really panicked me when I saw it, because I thought, what the fuck? So basically, all the global string and array helpers have been deprecated, and they'll be completely removed in Laravel 5.9. So what does it mean? So if you use any function that begins with array underscore, that's a Laravel support function, or if you use any of the string helpers, and this one is a little bit more tricky because they could be called anything. They usually don't have a string prefix, although some of them do, but it could be something like pluralize or snake case or like anything that's to do with a string. If it's in the global namespace, probably that's relevant to this. And you can check this pull request for a full list.
Is that the Illuminate support package itself?
Yeah, no, because it's not a separate package, or it used to not be a separate package. It's part of Illuminate, like the vendor package. And basically all it is all the string and array helpers. They're just global functions, but if you look at it, all they are is they're wrappers for actual classes which have static functions of the same nature. And so basically the reason why it's been deprecated is because it's bad practice, first of all, to put all these helpers in the global namespace, especially the array ones, because PHP STL also uses array underscore, so it's probably just a matter of time before there's like some kind of a conflict. So instead what they want people to do is to use the actual AR, so the R and the str class helpers, instead of using the global namespace helpers. So the functionality isn't leaving Laravel as I had assumed this moment I read that. It's actually just that they don't want people using the global namespace functions. Yeah, so if you do want to keep using it, which like obviously the hint is don't use it, but if you want to keep using it, you can use that package. It's not really clear how long it will be supported for, so it's probably a good idea not to, but if it's too much work for you to change your code, you can do that in the interim. But the better thing to do, obviously, is to update your code so that it uses the actual array and string helpers. So all you have to do is, anytime you're using one, use this or str if it's a string helper, and it's actually even shorter. Like this uses 2 less characters than this. Yeah, so basically that's what you got to do. I think it's very easy for array functions, but it's going to be painful for string functions. Unless you use Laravel Shift. I don't get paid by Laravel Shift. Yeah, and if you yourself, so if you have a whole bunch of helper functions in the global namespace, as we did until recently, maybe also rewrite them so that it uses the more I guess the namespace approach. So instead of having global helpers, put them in something like app support helper, and then you have your static functions there. All right, so that's that's why you shouldn't use global stuff and things. Yeah, so that's the conclusion. It's an interesting update. It's been quite a long time since there was a breaking change. I don't know the last time. I think it was 5.4 or 5.3, can't remember. But yeah, this kind of makes me question as well, like where's Laravel 6? Because the way that a lot of frameworks would solve this problem is just by putting it into the next major release. I don't know why it is the case that it's been so long since a major release of Laravel.
Yeah, the 5.6, 5.7, 5.8. That second number is supposed to be breaking changes. They say it in the docs. So
Do they?
yeah, they do. Yeah.
But that's not how Semver
Yeah,
works.
they don't use Semver. Yeah, if you open up the docs, it's like in the intro. Yeah.
Nah, not acceptable. Yeah.
Any questions?
The major versions yeah, architecture.
Yeah. All right. I have two more kind of like bonus little quick things, unless there are more questions. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a very good question.
He's
actually.
asking if you can say a bit more about Laravel Shift.
Not that I get paid by Laravel Shift by every thing that they sell or anything, but so basically Laravel Shift is an online tool, and online? Well, it is online and it is a tool. So basically what happens is you give them your project and it will do any relevant conversions that are needed to achieve the next iteration of Laravel, right? So instead of you...
Pull request.
Yeah. So instead of you manually having to do this, it'll do it all for you and do a pull request, and you can have a look if there's anything crazy in there. And otherwise just merge it. And yeah, it costs like maybe $10 a run or something, I don't know. Like if you think about it in terms of man hours of programmers, probably it's cheaper than, you know, unless you spend literally 10 minutes or 5 minutes on it, it's probably cheaper to use that. Yeah. Any other questions?
And it generally doesn't use things.
Yeah.
I do.
I actually don't trust them to follow the install guide anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I've never used Laravel Shift as a disclaimer. But I think for a change like this, like I don't really want to go around changing all the string helpers, even though I'm sure it's a lot of fun. Huh? Yeah, but there's like 100 of them. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I suspect maybe if it hasn't already happened, someone will write a bash script to do it automatically. Maybe. Tom? Yeah, it's kind of like reinventing the wheel. Yeah. Anything else?
Actually, could you elaborate on Carbon 2? What are some of the other changes?
Sure.
You were very excited by Carbon 2.
Like, I can't remember, but there were several times when I wanted to use something, and one of those things was in fact the microsecond thing, that I wanted to have microseconds. I can't remember why. And I really, really wanted it, and Carbon 1 doesn't do it, and I was super pissed off. Datetime doesn't do it either. That's not useful. It's been out for ages, yeah. Actually, that's a good point. Because this, I think, has a link to go to the page that I want to go to. Which is this page. Alright, migrate to Carbon 2. Can everyone see that? Well, now it's gone to the top. That's no good. Alright. Some new... This is not the extent of the changes. I think these are like the maybe backwards breaking changes. Yeah. So I don't know if this is interesting so far as maybe it's more horrifying. I don't know. Is there such a thing as that? No, I don't think so. This is... there's a lot of things. Like some of the stuff I saw was it can convert, for example, between date time zones and time offsets, which I don't think Carbon 1 does. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just randomly scrolling up. I don't know where it is. But maybe, yeah, if you're interested, have a look at this link, which, remember it, I guess. I can post it on the Meetup channel, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here, and a lot of it Carbon 1 doesn't do, and it's super annoying.
Yeah, I think Carbon 2 has immutable carbon.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know if that works with Laravel, or if there's anything that breaks?
I mean, I wouldn't use it for your created dates. Well, I don't think you could anyway if you wanted to. But no, you could use it in your internal code, absolutely. So if you have a function and you have a date, the reason why that's useful, by the way, so if you have like a high-level function which calls, I don't know, 100 other functions, and you want to pass around the date object, and you're not really sure if that data object is going to get modified or not. You can make it an immutable data object, and that'll seal the deal. There's no way anything can modify it. So that is super useful. I think it'll work fine if it's your own code or vendor code. I'm not sure that Laravel itself would use it.
I think it gave the option to use it. I'm not sure if that's going to have any effects.
Yeah. I suspect what that means is you have the option to use it in your project. I don't think it means Laravel has rewritten all their dates to use immutable.
Okay, so the models don't use it then. Yeah.
I don't think
like
so.
the
Wouldn't
created at timestamps and stuff.
Wouldn't make sense, except maybe for created at, I guess. I hope not, because sometimes in my CEDAR I change to created at. So. Alrighty. So I have 2 quick things which are kind of fun and or funny. So one thing, oh yeah, the scheduler. So we had like a scheduler, and I guess we still do. And it schedules a whole bunch of tasks, and I was having a look at some of the really cool new flags that exist, like on one server and running background. And I've actually used on one server before. It's pretty useful. I've never used running background, but I had this professor at university. He said, you know, if you don't know what something does, just try it. So that's the general approach I take to things. So I tried it. I tried it, and what happened? It broke everything. None of the scheduled tasks executed. The finance team was like, "Where the fuck are our reports?" It was pretty funny, but it's not really clear to me why it broke. So I tried to kind of debug it, because I think it should work. It makes sense. Like, run this task in the background. Yeah, it's pretty useful.
Do you use Redis for your queues?
Yeah, no, we use SQS.
I think you need Redis to do that, I think.
As far as I know, the only thing that uses Redis in a scheduler is if you use non-overlapping, it will lock
Oh, no.
the task.
I thought it was for the jobs, if it was putting it into the background job or something. Does it split sentences?
I don't know. What my impression is, run a task in the background, I thought what it would do is put an ampersand at the end of the command when it ran it.
Oh yeah, I just saw the on one server. I thought that's
Oh, so on one server that works fine. No problem with that. It's run in the background, which screwed everything up. I don't know why to this day. I don't know. I had a look at the manual. I thought surely the manual will have some help, but it just kind of describes what it's used for. It didn't describe how it works at all. So I don't know. I had a look at the source code. It was a little bit too obfuscated. Like I couldn't figure out where was the thing that was actually using it. And I didn't want to spend more than like 2 minutes looking into it. Nobody on Slack answered. I haven't tried IRC yet. I think probably it's the better way to go. But yeah, I have no idea why it didn't work. It kind of seems very obvious that it's a good idea. So I don't know if anyone's ever come across that. Talk to me. I'd be very keen to know.
So what benefit would running in the background give you?
I think it doesn't block. So if you would run with an ampersand, like let's say, it probably doesn't matter too much for us because we have multiple, we have 2 things hitting the scheduler. But let's say you have 3 scheduled tasks that they're going to run in an hour, and they all take, I don't know, 10 minutes to run. That means each task will block the next task, whereas if you run it in the background, it'll just start one and then immediately start the next one, So this is the kind of use case for it, and it makes total sense. Like, it seems like a logical thing to do. I don't know why it doesn't work. I want to look more into it, but maybe when I'm less pressed on time.
Do you have without overlapping them?
I don't, but
2 were running at the same time.
yeah. So without, I feel like if you do on one server, you're never gonna get into that situation anyway. So I'm not sure.
No, if you got it to run every minute,
Yeah.
you might have 2 running at the same
Oh yeah. Yeah, we don't have any tasks that run. I don't think we have any tasks that run every minute. Like usually it's hourly, and none of them take an hour yet. So, alrighty. Second one. So I thought that was quite fun. It's like we didn't get any scheduled task for like a few days. That was fun. Yeah, this is the other thing that was really weird for me. So I work on one project which is like a financial sort of project, so we have to be really precise with some calculations. And you know, in some situations, when you're doing rounding, So we have a lot of situations where we're applying currency conversion, and if you do, usually you end up with something which has a lot of decimal places, and sometimes you might want to floor it, sometimes you might want to seal it, and usually, when you want to charge someone money, probably you want to seal it. If you want to pay someone money, probably you want to floor it, for example. Yeah.
Or if you use round, you can use the PHP, the constant, which is round half to even, so that you're less likely to have a statistical bias one way or down. I'm having the same issues.
What's half to even?
Okay, so it's called Banker's rounding. It's a different type of rounding algorithm. So.
Yeah, there we go.
So, in accounting, I've discovered that the recommended sort of rounding method to use is Banker's rounding or Gaussian rounding, and it rounds half numbers towards the nearest even number.
So that's like the mathematical rounding.
Yeah, the mathematical rounding. So you have less of a statistical bias up or down, which if you're doing a lot of operations, you end up with, it creeping upwards or creeping downwards, depending on what you're doing. And it's really also useful. Fairer in terms of that sort of stuff.
If you want to be fair, that's really fair.
Yeah, use that one. But that's the third parameter if you're using the round function in PHP. It comes after the decimal places.
Do you know what is the default? Is it to floor?
The default is up.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Which is why I kept on having all these rounding issues.
So this is kind of the problem I had, which is, in one situation, I actually didn't really want to round it at all. And so I thought, okay, this is super easy. There must be a function to not round, essentially, but there wasn't. This is what I found. Every function in PHP insists on rounding one way or the other. Even if you specify the way, it will always round. So if you want to do something like truncate at a certain decimal point, there's actually no way to do it using the PHP STL. And I was a little bit surprised, but I've never in my life had this use case, so I was also not surprised because it's probably not a common use case. But essentially, so if you have a number like this, and you wanted to, in either case, get this kind of result, so the same result, applying this truncate operation. So I want to truncate to the first two decimals. Doesn't matter if it would be floored or sealed or rounded to the nearest half. I just actually wanted the same result in every time. Apparently, there's no way to do it in PHP.
Treat it as a string or something.
Huh?
Like treat it as a string and take the last.
Yeah, exactly. But there's no one function to do it, which I was really annoyed with because it kind of made sense to me at the time that it should have it, but there wasn't. And I looked at some popular math libraries, and they also didn't have it. And I had a look at Stack Overflow, and it's kind of like that. Like, you don't really want to use code from Stack Overflow in your code always, most of the time. And some of them looked really dodgy, and it's like, I can come up immediately with a case that will make this fail and throw an error. So I wrote my own function to do this truncation operation. I wrote my own function, and I wrote 30 unit tests to make sure it will match every conceivable scenario, even ones that I knew would never happen in my application. And so, but then I went one step further, which is I think what people should be aiming to do. So I submitted it to this math.php package, and that's another funny thing because the guy was like, oh yeah, I'll happily accept this. And then for some reason they have some weird issue with their test coverage tool where it reported a lower test coverage. And so the package maintainer's trying to fix that before merging my pull request, which is super annoying, but anyway. Huh?
How'd you do it?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's probably like you said, so it just uses string functions to do it, and it tries to deal with a whole bunch of special use cases. Where is it? So this is I'll try and make it bigger. Wouldn't it be nice if I could just pull? But anyway, this is the function to do it. All it does is use string manipulation to find the decimal and then cut it off without. So it's basically it's kind of weird because it's almost like it's not a mathematical operation, it's a string operation, but it's being used for a mathematical reason. So it's really weird. Yeah.
I remember in either the North Meets South podcast or the Laravel News one, what's his name? The Australian dude from South Australia. Michael, that's the one.
Didn't he organise the Laravel?
Michael, he did, yes. I just was having a brain fart. He approached this in a slightly different way where he exploded on the decimal and then did the truncation after that. So.
Yeah, I'm sure there's like 10 ways to do it.
Oh yeah.
And actually, like, we're working on our HackerRank questions, and I submitted this as one of the questions we asked candidates. So probably I'll like put every answer together and see which one runs the fastest.
Probably dedicate my life to making it fast. That's all I'm going to do.
Oh yeah, so this is the interesting thing. So in my code, I closed it, didn't I? I reckon it wasn't even here, was it? Maybe it was. Yeah, so in my code, originally I converted it to a string, but here I kept it as this, which I think is a float. Yeah, well, if you do care about types, if you... Actually, yeah, if you use this function as a means of an argument into another function, it'll actually convert, even if it expects a certain type. So probably it doesn't matter. Yeah. Well, this is my talk. Thank you. This is it.
Chocolate and orange.
Yeah. Should I start?
Right on there, right?
So you can do them all if you want.
Where is it?
It's called Meetup.
I have like 10 of these.
So these are all the topics. We're thinking of going into a few discussion items if you guys are keen.
I reckon do it first because that's the most interesting one.
Yeah, if not, that's fine as well. Yes, first, no. I was just wondering who uses Lumen here? So, I guess I have to put my hand up.
Who would use Lumen for a new project?
Okay.
What's the special use case?
I don't know if they have this in a separate package now, but if you're just making a CLI tool, Lumen can like make that a lot easier.
Yeah.
I think it is. There is a package for making CLI tools with Laravel.
Yeah, it's a separate package even. So I guess when Lumen came around, the idea was that it was faster than Laravel, and it would just not bootstrap all this stuff that you don't really need, and you pull in whatever you want. But it seems like the community has kind of drifted away from it. So I guess I just wanted to confirm that. And given that no one really stuck their hands out when I was like, "Are you using Lumen?"
What about that guy? What's your name?
Which one?
Yeah.
Sean?
I'm
Sean.
going to give you the microphone.
Oh yeah.
I would like to hear from Sean on the topic.
Oh, sorry. I work with RESTful APIs a lot, so occasionally I think of with the next project I want to give Lumen a try, but I'm like you. I was like, is it something viable, or is it?
Eventually kill off in the next 12 months.
Okay, well then maybe I'm gonna rescind putting my hand up then.
I can
So
give.
I guess this is
I
kind
can
of
give my insight on it, which is I don't
Go
know.
on, Max. Give us
Maybe
your
it's
insight.
not that unique, but anyway. So I think at the time Lumen came out, there was a lot of buzz about this micro frameworks, right? What are some micro frameworks? Slim and Falcon, right? Yeah. So I think it was like a really popular trend in the community that a lot of people were looking to these micro frameworks to run really fast APIs. But somehow I think it's like it was a bit of a fad that had died down, I guess. And then, yep. Microphone.
Would that possibly be related to the support for those sort of languages and things like that in stuff like AWS Lambda? Like, did they sort of arise at a similar kind of time, and you had this battle between host your own lightweight framework versus just stick it in a function as a service type thing? Maybe
I
that
think
could have
that's an
contributed.
interesting point, because probably you wouldn't build like a huge project on one of these micro frameworks. Wouldn't make sense, right? So maybe the case.
I'd be interested to see whether he's disappeared now, but whether it would be worthwhile putting, like, if you would put Lumen into into Bref or something like that, so that you get that sort of Laravel syntax and small package type stuff.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think theoretically you could use Lumen without Bref, maybe, if assuming Lambda can do a PHP runtime. But I think that might involve more effort.
I think in a lot of cases, Lumen was supposed to be faster, and I think we've all noticed in web applications, like PHP is generally not the bottleneck. It's generally like your database or your Elasticsearch or all these other things are way more important to get right first before even PHP becomes a problem. So
yeah, and at the same time, at some point, I can't remember when, but like at least a year ago, probably 2 years ago, Laravel added something called deferred providers, which I don't know who here has used it, but essentially what it means is that because Laravel has this IOC container, right? And during Bootstrap, a whole bunch of providers get instantiated and get bound to the IOC container. But with deferred providers, a provider can be marked as deferred, which means during the Bootstrap process, it's not even touched until it's actually used by your code. So if you have, I don't know, a mail provider and you don't use it in 95% of your controllers, it'll never even be bootstrapped, so it's not going to slow down your request response cycle. And in my opinion, when that came in, it kind of alleviated that concern that Laravel might be slower than Lumen, because then essentially the only difference is that Lumen has a more lightweight router, but then at the same time Laravel added all of these features to their router, so it's kind of like, do I want the features or do I want a slightly more lightweight router?
When I looked at Lumen, it hasn't an update in 3 months. I think there's not been any releases, so kind of looks like Taylor Allwell's kind of gone. Yeah, this is not really maintained anymore, but he hasn't really said anything yet. So I guess it's just waiting for him to say, yeah, Lumen's dead, and then we can all move on.
I think it was when all the frameworks had that big, like, I'm faster than you competition like 3 years ago, and it was like this big break-off between them all.
I think PHP 7 made that irrelevant, but with those deferred provider things, they're actually really useful. I had to connect to like a SOAP client, and PHP's SOAP class, it actually makes a connection when you instantiate it. And because that was going in through a provider, it was a really slow service. Making that deferred was actually really good.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
Just a comment. Yeah.
Any other comments? If not, we'll do the last topic, the last kind of group discussion. Yeah. So I just wanted to ask this about integration testing and testing in general, and I'll give a bit of context to this. So we're kind of using the microservices design pattern a lot in our company, which means for any given system that we build, probably it's going to be talking to a whole bunch of other systems. And in any case, probably it's going to be talking to other third-party APIs. Now, the problem with that is if you have your unit test running, it's going to massively increase the time that the unit tests run, which then increase the time before you can merge your pull request, even like a one-line pull request, and it increases the deployment time, and it's all these things, and like nobody wants that. So what we've done a lot is used a tool called PHP VCR, which I'm just curious, how many people know what VCR is? No?
Video cassette recorder.
That's right. That is actually correct, but it seems like an interesting topic for a future talk if not a lot of people used it. But essentially it's like a tool which allows you to record a whole request response cycle and replay it during testing. So if you have, let's say, a call to Stripe and you want to make a payment and it's going to take like 5-10 seconds, you can actually record it super easily like a video cassette recorder. And it'll create a file in your resources directory, I think. No, your test directory. Or you can put it anywhere you like, it doesn't really matter, but basically you can use that file as the basis of replaying that request during a test. And what that means is instead of hitting that API, the third-party API, it's going to use that request response, and it's going to massively speed up your tests.
Where can we find that?
There we go.
Where can you find it?
I will post it on the group. I'll just take a note. Yeah. I'll post about Carbon 2.
Just put all your information on the meetup group.
Yeah, I'll post it on the meetup tonight, don't worry about it. But yeah, it is a pretty cool package. I didn't know about it. Andre discovered it and implemented it. It's pretty good.
You commit your snapshots?
Yeah, definitely. So it's just like, think of it as a fixture for a test, essentially, right?
Significance methods are like old school
And if you're doing it against the Stripe test.
Yeah.
Eject.
Insert cassette. Turn on, turn off. See, I think it's a good topic for like a meetup. But anyway, so you have this VCR thing, like, okay, that's super useful, massively speeds up your test. Like, your tests now take, microseconds.
That's where you need carbon too.
Wait, microphone.
So it's not just about the speed. The point is that it intercepts all the requests to the external APIs. So it basically works transparently for all your underlying functionality. So it thinks that it made the request to the third-party service and got a response, and response that you would like, whether it's success or error or whatever. So we can test all this stuff without actually calling external APIs.
Yeah. So that's all really good, but the obvious problem with that is what happens if the API actually changes their format, or, I don't know, adds an attribute, removes an attribute. Not that it should happen, but we all know it does. And what if the API is down? Like, there could be all sorts of things. So you probably still want some of the testing with a real API, but then how do you manage that and your regular automated test at the same time? So I guess now what we're running with is we have like a separate, well, we don't yet have it, but this is what we're planning to do in the next few weeks. We'll have like a separate testing suite of integration tests with third-party APIs, whether they be internal or external, as in maintained by our company or by other vendors. And we'll run that suite something like overnight just to make sure everything is still validating, but we'll run it separate to our normal test suite that's run on every commit. And I just wanted to,
I can't remember the name of the package at the moment, but I recently come across this one where you can like tag your slow tests, and so that they have to be specifically run separately.
Just save that comment because
Yep.
Yeah, essentially the question is, I just want to know what everyone else is doing, or if you're doing anything about this. Continue.
Not yet. Part of it is because some of them are slow, or I've been working offline, and I've not been able to necessarily connect to that. So, sorry, that's all I've got.
That's all right. Does anyone else have any comment? Like, is there anyone else like separating their test suites or writing some kind of separate integration tests?
Yeah, so the company I work for, it's like a service company, but we've got all these separate integrations or separate services, separate products, and the portal kind of has to communicate with them. So yeah, we just make a lot of services and just do a lot of fakes as well, and I don't know, it's actually quite beneficial when running the tests because we're pretty confident that the fakes work because we're familiar with them. But yeah, we have also got the option to run them as like a live test when we just swap out the fake implementation for the real one in the containers. It's just it's a good pattern to follow, and it's pretty good. So
cool.
So in our use case, where we were kind of dying was in the end-to-end testing. So I'm not sure who here has used Selenium, but it is not fast. And it's always a trade-off between your developers being blocked in pushing code up and getting it merged into your staging or UAT environment, or kind of having them sit there for 10 minutes while all these tests run. The optimal kind of design that we were trying to aim for, which I didn't get to the point of, is basically running them really long use case tests before any sort of UAT or staging code goes into master. Then you really need like a proper release schedule, and you can't just have them one-off branches going in and out.
So just to confirm, what you're saying is your normal feature merging, you wouldn't run those tests, but whenever it goes to a UAT or staging environment, that's when you would run those tests?
Yeah, and you would have to package it up as a proper release, and there's a lot of extra workflows you kind of end up having to deal with when you go down that route. So it's definitely a trade-off between developer convenience and good tests. So yeah.
I just found the thing. It was PHP units group annotation, so you can group the slow things together or the large things together. Just a recent Laravel News article just had some information about speeding up your PHP unit testing. So
And you can run them separately.
Yeah. So if you're running your standard
Perfect.
unit test, you just have that suite run, and then you specifically choose to run the slow ones or the large ones or whatever
Well,
it
that
is.
seems really convenient.
Yeah.
For this integration testing.
Out of the box.
Has anyone used Dusk? Because you talk about Selenium and Dusk is kind of like Headless.
Yeah, so the question is, does anyone use Dusk?
I feel like Astrid has, but she's not here.
Oh, I think.
I've used Dusk for testing a couple of times. It can definitely be a good thing, but I think some of the problems I ran into with like the timing, so you have to wait for like certain things to load. So
Yeah, I just remember, so the girl in my team used it and for our front end testing, and I think her feedback was it's much faster than Selenium, but it's much more immature, so it doesn't have all the features. So, and I think it's only on Chrome, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. So whereas Selenium, it can work with a multitude of drivers. So it's like, yeah. If you only care about, if you don't care about IE, I think it's great. If you have that luxury.
Yeah, some of the, like recently, just speaking of IE, I recently had to fix something where it didn't want to accept the time zone format with a colon. Like I was putting in the time zone offset of GMT plus 12.
Oh, yeah.
And it just balked when it had with colon.
Yeah. It's like one of these things, it's kind of like Docker some years ago where you can see it's going to be great, but it's just not there yet. It's probably, I don't know, probably my feeling.
Anyone want to discuss anything else, or we're all happy to go home? Cool. Well, thanks everyone for coming. We'll do another one in March, and yeah, you'll see the invite. Cool. Thanks guys.
Thank you.